Well, happy Wednesday to you. I hope you're doing well today, and I trust that it's been a good day so far and it will continue to be a great day. Thanks for giving me 5 to 7 minutes as we continue our study on the 12 disciples. Today we're going to be in John chapter 1, so if you want to get your copy of God's Word and find John chapter 1, we're going to be in verses 45 through 51. Let's do our quick review of who the disciples were. They were valuable companions to Jesus. They stayed with Jesus and they learned from him. And then once Jesus ascended after his death, his burial, and his resurrection, he went back to heaven, and the apostles then took Jesus' message to the world. The disciples, they were fishermen to tax collectors to revolutionaries. Each disciple, when they wanted to follow Christ, they needed to evaluate their relationships, and they also needed to evaluate what they would do with their career. Were they willing to set their career aside to follow Jesus? A disciple, they must be willing to serve others and not seek the service for themselves. And finally, we call them a disciple before the resurrection of Jesus, and then after the resurrection in Acts chapter 1, we start to call them apostles because they have been with Christ from his baptism through the ascension, and they're the same people, just how long they were with Christ and then where they were at in their ministry with Christ. And I encourage you to look at Acts chapter 1 verse 21. So this morning we're going to be in John chapter 1. We're going to look at the apostle Bartholomew. He's also called Nathanael. So because of ease, I will call him Nathanael because that's what I grew up calling him, but it's the same person. I love detective shows. I remember watching Matlock. Remember the guy, the lawyer that always ate the hot dogs all the time? And then I also watched Diagnosis Murder with Dick Van Dyke. Remember, he was the doctor, had his son Barry Van Dyke that was the detective, and then he would have his father, the doctor, Dick Van Dyke, help him solve murders. And then we have to look and talk about Monk. Remember, he always had to touch everything? Love Monk. And now we're looking at NCIS or Blue Bloods. I love detective shows because it always reminds me that if you follow the clues, you're going to find out who did it. The evidence always points to the person that did it. And so with that in mind, we're going to talk about Nathanael. Nathanael, his name means God has given. Nathanael, he was born in Canaan. Nathanael, he knew the Hebrew Scriptures. What are the Hebrew Scriptures? We would call them today the Old Testament, the books from Genesis through Malachi, the Old Testament before Christ came. So Nathanael, he knew that and he studied them and he was very familiar with them. Nathanael was called into ministry or called to be a disciple or apostle of Jesus when Jesus saw him sitting under the fig tree. Now, Jesus told Nathanael that he saw Nathanael sitting underneath the fig tree when Jesus wasn't even around. And after that, Nathanael was all in following Christ. Nathanael confessed Jesus was the Son of God once Jesus told Nathanael what he was doing and where he was at. We don't know what Nathanael did in his previous career. I could not find that in the Scriptures. What does church tradition teach us about Nathanael? We believe that Nathanael ministered in Asia Minor and in through modern day India. And then church tradition also teaches us that he was filleted or skinned alive, and that caused his death in Armenia. And we're going to go into that in a couple more minutes. But just think about that. Nathanael, who was skeptical of Jesus at the beginning, followed Christ and died a hideously painful death as he was skinned alive. I thought about that for the last hour and a half, and it has really caused me to stop and think. And I'll get to that in a minute. What was his personality? What do we know about Nathanael? Well, we know that he was skeptical. When you go after we're done and read John chapter 1, verses 45 or 46 through 51, we're going to read that one of Nathanael's first comments to Jesus is he said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" That is a good question that can cause a lot of people to stop and pause. Because Nathanael, his first encounter was he was skeptical. And there are many people that are skeptical about Jesus. But don't stop at the skepticism. Nathanael, he didn't. He continued to pursue. He continued to follow the clues. He continued to be a good detective, if you will. And he followed the clues based upon his studying of the Old Testament and the Hebrew scriptures. And he followed the evidence, and the evidence led him to Jesus. And Nathanael turned and said, Jesus, you are the Son of God. So if you're watching this and you're skeptical, that's okay. Nathanael was skeptical, but don't stay in the skepticism. Continue to study to find the truth. Nathanael, he was an honest person. That we see that in verse 47. And then Nathanael, he was faithful in John 1:49. And we see that Nathanael was faithful not just in the beginning of Jesus' ministry, but how we believe Nathanael was brought to death as being filleted in Armenia. And what a hideous way to die. What can we learn from the life of Nathanael? We can learn that the disciples, and we can even apply that to us today as believers, we are called to test all things with God's word. We are called to test and to look at the evidence, to follow the clues. The clues about what Jesus said, the clues about what Jesus was prophesied in the Old Testament to do and to be. We are told to follow the clues, follow the evidence, and that's going to lead us to Jesus. What is the evidence? The evidence is found in God's Word, the Bible. And we are to make sure it's true. That is our guide, that is our direction, that is our light to help us know the truth. We are called to remain focused on what God has told us through his written word. We see that with Nathanael. He studied the Old Testament and he applied what he knew and said, Jesus, you are the Son of God. But it was first met with skepticism. Nathanael, he heard about Jesus. He was unsure of who Jesus was, but he did not let that uncertainty stop him from examining. And any good detective show, whether it's from Matlock the whole way to whatever you watch today, Blue Bloods, NCIS, or anything else, they always follow the evidence. Sometimes they waver a little bit, but they come back to the clues, they come back to the evidence, and they find the person. Nathanael, once he met Jesus, he knew that Jesus was from God, and Nathanael followed him his whole entire life, even to his painful death. How about you? How about you? Are you continuing to examine and follow the principles that we find in God's Word? Are you living with skepticism? Do you have questions? Well, don't let those questions stop you. Continue to follow the evidence. Continue to follow the trail. And the trail will lead you to the answers. The trail will lead you to the truth. The trail will lead you to Jesus, who was the way, the truth, and the life. The second part of application is, how far are you willing to go for Jesus' message? The way Nathanael died hit me very strong as I studied. And that caused me to ask myself the question, how far am I willing to go for Jesus' message? I hope that you have a great Wednesday. If you're in the area and want to have a good study of the Sermon on the Mount, I'd encourage you to join us tonight at our church at 6:30 for about 20 minutes to half hour as we look at the greatest message ever preached by the greatest preacher ever to have lived, Jesus Christ. However, have a great Wednesday, and I'll see you tomorrow morning.